Switches are fun little tools with a lot of potential. They are great for interesting modulation setups, routing and creating triggers, gates and sequences, as well as interesting audio rate processing and manipulation. If you like to support my work or you want to get access to PDF sheets with hundreds of patch ideas I used in my videos, have a look at my Patreon. You can also support my work through affiliate links in the video description. But now, let's dive right in. For this video, I'll be using these two modules. This video is not sponsored though, and there are many alternatives from a lot of different companies, all following a similar idea. A normal switch connects 2 points in a circuit when it's switched on. When it's switched off, it breaks that connection. Modular two-way switches utilize both positions of the switch. So if you send a signal to the input, you can switch between sending the input to one of two destinations. Different switches have different ways of operation and different features. For example, the Doepfer A150 is a dual switch, each similar to the one shown in the graphic. It has a CV input that requires a high gate. When there is no gate, the switch is in one position, and when the gate is high, it's in the other position. Also, it can be used in two directions, meaning you can send it two signals and switch to select which of those two signals is sent to a single destination. This is a powerful feature worth looking for in a switch. The Doepfer A151 can also work in both directions, but this one offers a single in or output connected to one of 4 in or outputs. In contrast to the A150, it's a sequential switch and works slightly different. This module has a CV input that requires a trigger. Every time you send it one, the switch advances to the next option in line and stays there until the next trigger, cycling through the possibilities. A switch is one of those type of modules I'd recommend reading the manual for the module you are interested in before buying. And just a quick tip, a voltage controlled panner can be used as a single input 2 output switch, and a voltage controlled crossfader can be used as a 2 input 1 output switch. Don't patch these in reversed way though. If you'd like to know how you can make these functions with just a couple of VCAs and an inverter, have a look at this video I made. So switches are basic tools that control signal routing. That means they can be used for a huge number of things. Instead of situations with specific modules, in this chapter I'll show 4 concepts for modulation you can apply in many situations. The first is the simplest. Here's an oscillator, filter, VCA voice with a sequencer tuning the oscillator and triggering an envelope opening the filter and VCA. An LFO is sent to a switch used to select the direct destination for the LFO. In dispatch, a two-way switch is used and the outputs are patched to the oscillator FM and the filter frequency. You can use something like a clock division or an unsynced slow square wave LFO to switch between destinations. This type of switching can be a bit harsh and mechanical because the switching is instant. I often like slightly smoother setups. Here's a subtle variation of the same concept using the same voice. This time though, a second short envelope is used as the input for the switch. The two destinations for the envelope are the oscillator FM and filter frequency. The second envelope is triggered with the master clock and the switch with a division. So the envelope's destination switches every couple of steps. Because the envelope is set to be shorter than each step, there is no hard switching audible. Concept 2 is a bit more complex. Here it's used on a voice with added wavefolder. A second envelope is triggered and sent to a 3-way switch advanced with the clock division. Instead of sending the envelope to modulate a parameter directly, it opens one of 3 VCAs. As input for the VCAs, a single audio rate LFO is used, and the outputs of the VCAs are sent to the FM, filter frequency and wavefolder. This creates short bursts of modulation. The third concept is more extensive. To show this, a voice with added wavefolder is used. A copy of the master clock is used to cycle through a three-way switch. As the input for the switch, another copy of the clock can be used if it outputs gates. Alternatively, you can use a high offset voltage as the input for the switch. This effectively distributes a high gate signal over three outputs. These can be used to gate or trigger envelopes, each modulating another parameter in a patch. This setup leads to smooth results because the decay or release stages of the envelopes can create smooth transitions. The fourth concept is a variation of the third. Instead of using the envelopes directly, they can be used to open VCAs. Here, a slow sequence is used, driving three ADSR envelopes. A simple audio rate LFO is used as the input for all the VCAs, but you can use different inputs for each VCA if you like. Again, this creates a very smooth modulation distribution with smooth transitions, great for drones and ambient patches. These concepts can be approached in reverse as well. Here's a simple voice with a 2-in, 1-out switch. A single LFO is used to send a square and sine wave to the inputs of a switch, and a copy of the square is used to drive a divider. A divide by 4 is used to control the switch, altering between the square and the sine modulating the filter. Because the LFO isn't synced in this setup, this creates nice stuttering delay-like modulation. Here's a reversed example with a simple voice and a quad sequential switch. A copy of the clock is driving a divider, advancing the switch with a division of 16. This slowly switches between 4 different modulation inputs: a divide by 2 clock, a swing speed LFO, a smooth random voltage, and an audio rate LFO. To avoid static hard switching sounds, the output of the switch is sent through a VCA before modulating the filter. A copy of the divide by 16 is gating an ADSR, opening that VCA, creating waves of altering modulation. Switches are also great to control or manipulate triggers, gate patterns and sequences. For example, you can send a trigger sequence to a switch and use the sequencer's clock to drive a divider. Use a fun division or even another pattern generator or random signal to switch between triggering 2 different samples. Here that's done with just 2 samples, but you can use a sequential switch to cycle through multiple different samples as well. This also works the other way around. Here, 2 different synced trigger patterns are sent to the inputs of a switch. A clock division is switching between the patterns, triggering a single sample. Here's the same concept, but this time a clock divider is switching between two melodic sequences. Depending on the quality of your switch, there might be some voltage loss. But in this setup, the output of the switch is sent through a quantizer, and the quantizer is used to drive a simple synth voice. Another fun trick is using different divisions of a divider as inputs for the switch and a slow division to switch between those divisions. Then use the output to drive a sequencer, effectively switching between two clock speeds. Here the sequencer is tuning a simple voice. A clock is used to drive the divider and trigger the envelope in the voice directly, creating nice slow sequences with fast pulses. Sequential switches are also great to create simple CV sequences. Just send an offset or steady high voltage to the input of the switch and use a mixer to mix the outputs of the switch. Use a clock to cycle through the outputs and use the level inputs of the mixer to create a simple sequence. For example, to modulate the filter in a simple drone or melodic voice. If you're interested in using switches to create complex melodies, make sure to check my video on custom sequencers for in-depth tips and patches. Good analog switches can easily handle audio rate signals as well. Here's a fun example where 4 different oscillator waveforms from the same oscillator are sent to 4 inputs of a sequential switch. One of them is a sub-octave output for extra effect. This setup is used in a normal voice with filter, VCA, sequencer and envelope. A copy of the clock is used to drive a divider and an uneven division is used to advance the switch. This results in a different waveform being used in the voice every few steps of the sequence. Here's the same setup, but instead of a clock division, a second oscillator is used to advance the switch at audio rates. You can use an untuned oscillator or send a copy of the sequence to the second oscillator as well to maintain a ratio. If the tuning of the oscillator is very similar or related to the first, the result is a complex shifting waveform. quad sequential switch can also be used to create a very simple graphic oscillator. Here, a steady offset voltage is used as the input for the switch and the 4 outputs are sent to a mixer. A sequencer is tuning an oscillator and the square out of that oscillator is advancing the switch. Note that this is not the oscillator used for the voice, and it needs to be tuned 4 octaves above the frequency you want to hear when using a quad switch. Here, the mix is sent through a filter and VCA, modulated with a simple envelope to create a voice. Using the level inputs on the mixer in this setup controls the 4 parts of the waveform. Switches can also be used for interesting audio routing. For example, here a single snare sample triggered by a pattern sequencer is sent to the input of a two-way switch. The outputs of the switch are sent to a full wet, reverb and delay, beside a copy of the dry signal. You can use a clock division, other pattern or even an unsynced LFO to switch the destinations of the sample. Let me know if you have favorite patches with a switch that I missed. If you'd like to learn more, have a look here, and as always, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now, thanks for watching and see you next time.